Thank you for your participation to the event on India's G20 presidency, One Earth, One Family, One Future Today. 本日は G20 議長国インド、一つの地球、一つの家族、一つの未来にご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございます。Before we get into the main topic, we would like to show you a video on Chandrayaan-3. India became the first country to successfully land a spacecraft near the lunar South Pole. 本日の本題に入る前に、インドの月面探査機チャンドラヤーン3号の映像を上映いたします。インドは月の南極付近へ探査機を着陸させることに成功した最初の国となりました。それではスクリーンをご覧くださいませ。
This point are providing confirmation of the safety of the landing site.
As expected, the retargeting is going on, and this is a very good signature for the lander. अभी आप ये देख सकते हैं कि लैंडर की ऊंचाई लगभग 65 मीटर के आसपास बची हुई है।
Currently, only 2 engines are now being fired, and we are nearly at zero velocity, vertical and horizontal. We were hovering, and now we are approaching the moon's surface.
धीरे धीरे लैंडर की वेगमान को कम किया जा रहा है और हम अब लगभग 50 मीटर से भी कम आ चुके हैं।
We can see the Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, who is here to encourage us, and he is critically looking at the visuals.
जी हाँ, आप अपनी स्क्रीन पे देख सकते हैं कि हम लैंडर मॉड्यूल
People are applauding. Let us all wait to hear from the Secretary Department of Space and Chairman ISRO, Shri S. Somnath.
लैंडर मॉड्यूल पूरी तरह से सेफली और सॉफ्टली चंद्रमा के सतह पे लैंड हो चुका है। ये हम लोगों के लिए बहुत ही गर्व की बात है। हिंदी में एक कहावत है,
We will now get into today's topic, India's G20 presidency. First video is about wrap-up of India's G20 presidency. G20 leaders meeting was successfully held in New Delhi, India on 9 to 10 September 2023. それでは本日の本題、G20 議長国インドに入りたいと思います。最初に G20 議長国インドの総括映像を上映いたします。9月9日から10日にかけてインド・ニューデリーで G20 首脳会議が開催され、成功裏に終了いたしました。それではスクリーンをご覧くださいませ。
Your Highnesses, Excellencies, G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत आप सभी का हार्दिक स्वागत करता है। भारत की G20 प्रेसिडेंसी देश के भीतर और देश के बाहर इंक्लूजन का, सबका साथ का प्रतीक बन गई है। आप सबकी सहमति से मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। संपूर्ण विश्व में आशा और शांति का संचार हो। 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की इसी मंगल कामना के साथ आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Next, may I invite His Excellency Mr. Shibi George, Ambassador of India to Japan, to make remarks. 続きまして、駐日インド大使、シビ・ジョージ閣下よりご挨拶をいただきます。
Honorable Member of Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I am delighted to speak to you today at the event on India's G20 presidency. At the embassy, each month, we have been sharing important developments on G20 presidency and highlight different aspects of it. This is the first meeting that we are organizing after the G20 summit in New Delhi. We have all seen the successful conclusion of India's G20 presidency. In terms of scale, theme, and outcome, it has indeed been a unique event. The challenges have been unprecedented, but when we look back today, each one of us can be proud that it has been a grand success. Given the state of geopolitics of 2023, the summit has been a model for successful multilateralism with the 34-page, 83 points Delhi Declaration reflective of the hope in the world. Let me quote Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji, who said in his remarks at the beginning of the summit in New Delhi, I quote, "After COVID-19, a huge crisis of lack of trust has come in the world. Conflict has deepened this trust deficit. Just as we can overcome COVID, we can also overcome this crisis of mutual trust. Today, as the president of the G20, India invites the entire world to come together and first and foremost transform the global trust deficit into global trust and confidence," unquote. Dear friends, this is exactly what we saw in New Delhi during the summit. The theme that India chose was Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one world. One of the objectives of India's G20 chair was to make the G20 more inclusive and expand it to include the African Union as a permanent member. With this, the representative voices of 1.4 billion people of Africa, situated in 55 countries with an economic size of 2.7 trillion US dollars, have been brought to the G20 table and world focus. The voice of Global South that India hosted in January this year, with the participation of 125 countries, brought to the agenda of their concerns and aspirations. These were among the topics discussed in over 220 meetings held in 60 cities of India during the G20 presidency. In his concluding remarks, Prime Minister said that he will host another G20 summit virtually before the end of his presidency in November this year. Dear friends, I would also like to quote Honorable External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jayashankar, who spoke at the UNGA yesterday, United Nations General Assembly yesterday. He said, and I quote, recognizing that growth and development must focus on the most vulnerable, we began the G20 presidency by convening the voice of the Global South Summit. This enabled us to hear directly from 125 nations and place their concerns on the G20 agenda. As a consequence, the issues which deserve global attention got a fair hearing. More than that, the deliberations produced outcomes that have great significance for the international community. He said, I continue, Mr. President, it was also noteworthy that at India's initiative, the African Union was admitted as a permanent member of the G20. By doing so, we gave voice to an entire continent which has long been its due. This significant step in reform should inspire the United Nations, a much older organization, to also make the Security Council contemporary. Broad representation is, after all, a prerequisite for both effectiveness and credibility, unquote. Dear friends, the New Delhi G20 outcomes are expressed both as larger policies and special initiatives. They could be about building cities for tomorrow or fighting corruption, eliminating hunger or delivering quality education, ending plastic pollution or preserving ocean-based economy, or that matter, enhancing food security or even mapping global skills. Even as we encourage collective endeavors, India also seeks to promote cooperation with diverse partners. From the era of non-alignment, we have now evolved to that of Vishwamitra, a friend of the world. This is reflected in our ability and willingness to engage with a broad range of nations and, where necessary, harmonize interests. India demonstrated its Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam during the COVID through the Vaccine Maitri initiative. Our endeavors, like the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, have gathered wide support. Our espousing of International Year of Millets is enhancing global food security today. Dear friends, I would like to conclude today's intervention by thanking our Japanese friends for their active participation in the G20 events in India and also in the embassy here. This was the third meeting of our prime ministers in each other's countries this year. Prime Minister, His Excellency Kishida, was in New Delhi in March this year and again for the G20 summit in September this year. Prime Minister Modi had visited Japan, that is Hiroshima, for the G7 summit. In fact, there was close collaboration and exchange of views between India and Japan as the chair of G7 presidency, as the G20 presidency. I am sure that in coming months and years, we will continue to further strengthen our engagement, both bilaterally and plurilaterally and in multilateral forums, to live up to the expectations of our leadership who have established special strategic and global partnership. I would also like to mention that each of our Japanese friends who have traveled to India to attend the G20 meetings in India, whether it is G2G, B2B, or T2T, whatever level it is of the 220 meetings, they all returned with a great sense of appreciation for India's growth story and its cultural diversity. They have only one message to share: India has transformed. And what we see today is a new India. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Good afternoon.
Thank you, sir. Next, we will show you a video on remarks made by Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, during India UN for Global South event at UNGA 78. 続きまして、第78回国連総会グローバルサウスイベントでのインド外務大臣ジャイ・シャンカル閣下によるスピーチ映像を上映いたします。スクリーンをご覧ください。
Mr. President, Madam Prime Minister, my ministerial colleagues, Excellencies and friends. Let me begin by expressing my most sincere appreciation to all of you for joining us this evening. Your presence means a lot to us. It also expresses the sentiments that you feel for India and underlines the importance of South-South cooperation. We meet just a few weeks after the New Delhi G20 summit, a summit which took place on the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future.
Now, it was a challenging summit. It was actually a challenging presidency. And it was challenging because we were confronting a very sharp East-West polarization as well as a very deep North-South divide. But we were very determined as the presidency of the G20 to make sure that this organization on which the world really had put so much hope, that this was able to get back to its core agenda, and its core agenda was of global growth and development. So it was appropriate that we started our G20 presidency by convening the Voice of the Global South Summit, an exercise which involved 125 nations of the South, of which most of you in some capacity participated. Now, during the course of that exercise and the deliberations which took place through the various ministerial tracks and engagement groups, it was very clear to us that the Global South, in addition to bearing the consequences of structural inequities and historical burdens, was plagued by the impact of mercantilism and economic concentration, was suffering from the devastating consequences of the COVID, and was beset by conflict, tensions, and disputes which have stressed and distorted the international economy. With each passing day, in fact, it has become clearer to us that today geopolitical calculations and geopolitical contests are impacting very basic requirements of many countries, including their affordable access to food, to fertilizers, and to energy. It was therefore for us a particularly onerous responsibility to make sure that in collaboration with all our G20 members, that we were able to refocus the G20 on the urgent, the pressing needs of the Global South. And this was reflected, to my mind, in 8 key outcomes of the New Delhi G20 summit. the action plan for Sustainable Development Goals, the reform of international financial institutions, a Green Development Pact, the High Principles for Life, the Lifestyle for Environment Initiative, an understanding on debt management, a consensus on women-led development, an acceptance of digital public infrastructure, and an agreement to undertake global skills mapping. We do believe that the New Delhi summit of the G20 has in many ways laid the foundation for the international community really to look at its development prospects, hopefully with greater optimism, certainly in our expectation with more resources, and that the decade ahead would allow us really to overcome the challenges that we have all experienced over the last few years. So let me conclude, therefore, once again, by emphasizing to you that while we are, of course, the G20 president till the end of this year, both before the G20 presidency and certainly after it, we will remain very much a partner, a contributor, a collaborator, in our own way, perhaps an inspiration to others on how to address developmental challenges. Our experiences and our achievements we place before you in a spirit really of sharing. We know that there may be aspects of it which you may find useful. As Ambassador Kamboj mentioned, that we are today active in almost 80 countries around the world. And what I can say is that when it has come to South-South cooperation, we have endeavored to walk the talk. My remarks on this subject would, of course, not be complete without my underlining what I believe was one of the really important outcomes of the G20, which was the membership of the African Union. And certainly it is our hope that that message would resonate not just in the G20, but beyond as well. So thank you once again for being here today, and I hope that you will all have a very productive evening.
Lastly, we will show you a video on G20 logo and theme. 最後に G20 議長国インドのロゴとテーマについての映像を上映いたします。
India, home of 1.3 billion people, is a confluence of religions, traditions, and customs. A thriving global center of technology and the world's largest democracy. As one of the oldest civilizations in the world with a rich cultural heritage and diversity, and as the fifth largest economy in the world, India is proud to assume the presidency of G20. As the country blooms into a new era, we look to another poignant symbol for humanity to emerge victorious from its challenges. Lotus, the national flower of India, representing our culture, history, and heritage. A poignant symbol for humanity to emerge victorious from its challenges. And the inspiration for India's G20 logo design. The design, rendered in saffron, white, green, and blue, is drawn from the national flag of India. The 7 petals in the logo signify the 7 seas and the coming together of 7 continents at G20 India 2023. Sitting above the lotus is a representation of the earth, reflecting India's pro-planet approach to life and seeing the world as one family. From this, we derive the theme for G20 India 2023, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. A theme that brings the G20's focus on shared global growth, while being in harmony with nature. G20 India 2023. One earth, one family, one future. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
We will now conclude the event on India's G20 presidency, One Earth, One Family, One Future today. Thank you very much for your participation. 以上をもちまして、本日のイベント G20 議長国インド、一つの地球、一つの家族、一つの未来を終了とさせていただきます。本日はご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございました。We will have a networking session with light refreshment at the foyer. We hope you